So I've been asked to speak about case histories, and so I'll go straight to this first one. So the case I'm drawn to speak about is one I did for someone a few years ago, and what happened is that I was working at that time very familiar with my guides, and the helpers were quite new on the scene. They'd only been around for a few months at that point. And I did this journey as I usually do, looking for a lost soul part, and the situation was that it was different from normal because for a start the helpers created this craft that we were going to travel in, so we knew we were going to go somewhere a little bit different, but we had no idea where. We thought, okay, it's going to be off the planet somewhere. This shows how long ago this was, because at that time it's quite an unusual phenomenon. So the helpers manifested their craft, and the guides and myself and the helpers were in the craft, and we arrived at the destination of this lost soul part. And the thing that concerned me immediately is that I couldn't actually understand or assemble into any sense of coherence what it was I was witnessing. And so I did what I always do. I turned to the guides and said, "Guides, can you help? I can't actually understand what information I'm taking in here." And they said, "No, we can't help. We have exactly the same problem as you've got." So at that point I thought, help us, please help us. And so what happened is one of the helpers went over to the side of the craft and made some very minor adjustments, or so it appeared, and the next thing I knew, both me and the guides, we could all see exactly what was going on. And what was going on was something that we could actually perceive with our senses, but it was still very, very strange, and I was aware that it wasn't anywhere within our normal range of activity. It wasn't in the known universe as such, it was in a different dimension. This is one of my earliest experience of travelling into other dimensions, so it's particularly exciting, somewhat scary and surprising development. And we encountered the soul part very, very quickly. We could see this soul part had been suffering unimaginable torment, probably for a period of time I wouldn't like to think about. So as soon as we were able to actually assemble the reality into some sort of coherence, we then went straight into action, did the on-the-spot healing, did the soul retrieval, brought the soul back with the help of the helpers and the craft they created to transport us there and to transport us back. And that's one that I will always remember, because I have experience of travelling outside of the dimensions, particularly with Mother A, and also particularly with Selva Divinorum. That's plant spirit medicine mediated, but there was no plant spirit involved whatsoever. It was simply me, the guides and helpers doing a journey and finding ourselves in somewhere completely unexpected. That's certainly one that I remember. This one popped up instantly because it came up in the USR training yesterday. And it was another example where this is what I want to share. I want to bring it back into this subject. By now I think you all know, but I need to reiterate this. All the USR work, which means all the negative energy release, is done from the Orange Healing Room, which is of course outside of this galaxy, and all the protections are in place from the helpers. This was before those days. This was in the days when I actually used to go with magical artifacts such as crystals and athames, which are magical daggers. I used to actually work like this in the old days because that was all I knew. So working with those actual concrete modalities, being aware that I was going into a dangerous place, which is the middle world, where the misusers of magic get up to their mischief and mayhem, with the guys, with the helpers, completely prepared, we went in to do this particular piece of work because there was a human being who'd come to me for healing, and he knew he was being persecuted by misusers of magic, so we knew what we had to do. We knew the level of severity we'd be exposed to before we even started, just as well. So Guide Narbeth had considerably increased his powers over the time that I've been doing my training, and at this point in his development he had this staff, so he simply struck the staff on the ground and created a zone of total exclusion like a hemisphere. We would work then safely and comfortably without any need to rush while he protected the space, and we would do everything to do the on-the-spot healing for the client to alleviate their immediate distress, do sufficient healing to prepare them to actually be able to leave the space, and then we would exit as swiftly and as gracefully as we could do. However, the force behind these negative energies gave us all a turn, because we were simply busily getting on with our work, and the next thing we knew, we looked up and we could see that this band of negative energies had actually created like a wedge shape, and they basically produced this wedge and they pushed it right hard into the sphere of protection that Narbeth had created. And it's the only time I ever saw this happen, I actually saw the completely normally solid sphere bulge in at this one point. As soon as that happened, of course, we all knew what we had to do, which was to instantly stop what we were doing and redouble all our energies into supporting Narbeth. And then as soon as that happened, and this is a bit that I was delighted about, and this shows about how the powers of the dark and the powers of the light work. Because yes, the powers of the dark were sufficient to be able to dent our force field of protection. However, as soon as we all harnessed our unbending intent, what actually happened is that the force field then grew to be so much larger, thereby pushing them so much further away. And that just felt like a really great validation, because there's nothing better than really positive validation if you're working in a space that is perhaps not the safest of places to work. So that's one I certainly remember from the past, and I'm just delighted that this is literally history for me, because all my work's done through the Orange Healing Room. Then I'm drawn to speak about something that you mentioned, Dan, which is what about the bigger works? So there's a particular one that I got involved with, and it actually spans 2 continents, because the person concerned lives in a European country and their family also has roots in South America. So a country in Europe and a country in South America, that's actually where the family were living today. And this one was a very interesting one personally, because it was one of the very few times when I had the job of negative energy release to do, which is normally incredibly easy and swift, taking a matter of seconds or minutes normally. When all of a sudden, here I was doing a negative energy release, and I discovered that the sheer presence of the negative energy was outside of anything I'd ever encountered before, and I was very surprised about this. And when I tuned in deeper, as with the guides tuning in deeper as well, what we began to realize is this was not one negative energy, this was not one entity, it was actually a conglomeration of many, many thousands of entities. And what they've done is they've banded together in a way to protect themselves, because this particular negative energy went back a long time, and in those days what some shamans would do is they would do a negative energy release, and they would actually consign or send the negative energies to a hell dimension. That's because they didn't have the understanding that negative energies actually are not malevolent out of spite or out of the desire to hurt. They've got an issue going on, and the issue going for all negative energies is that this planet is actually toxic and hostile to them. They can't survive, so therefore they look for a host, which is usually a human being. Inside the human being they can survive. So what made this a particularly interesting case is there were many thousands of entities that have banded together to form what I would call a super entity to protect themselves against work by shamans. So we had a lot of work to do to persuade this super entity that actually we were coming from love. And what needed to happen is that some of the negative energies we've released, they haven't had to come back through the blue vortex. And having come back through the blue vortex, they then connected with this super entity, and information was exchanged. And at that point, there was a degree of acceptance. And it still wasn't easy. And my allegory to describe what it was like is it's rather like, say, being on the launch pad of a Saturn V rocket, and you press the ignition button, and then there's a huge amount of smoke and flame and all sorts of things is going on there. Huge forces are being released, and yet that Saturn rocket is still sitting on the launch pad, and the next thing you notice, it starts to wobble and shudder, and then very slowly, almost inch by inch, is the way that rocket starts to move, and gradually as the acceleration increases, of course it accelerates faster and faster and faster, and it's off. This is exactly what it was like for us with this super entity, because it took so much effort, so much love from the guys to help us, from me. We just had to pour it on. We had to use all the other beings that were willing to help us, such as Saint Germain and other beings that worked with us, and it was a massive combined effort, and finally that energy was released. And why I was so grateful for this is because the manifestation in his family was such it was causing problems on both sides of the world. And I just want to draw my own attention back to one of the manifestations. One of the people in South America was so possessed by this super entity that what they did is they frequently found opportunity to set fire to people and burn people, either by pouring boiling water on them or setting fire to the place where they were living. And it shows you how extreme it can get. And this is what I want to draw to the conclusion with the negative energy release, is how what the person is often dealing with is voices in the head, which is issuing instructions. Now, if you've got a voice in your head that issues you some instructions, that's one thing, but if this has been going on for more than 20 years, eventually the person gets worn down and eventually end up doing things that no one in their right mind would ever do. So that was a particular piece of work I was very grateful for. having the experience of. Yeah, I've got another one.
Okay.
So another case history is how I worked for a couple, and it was very clear that both of the two people in the couple were not going to be able to handle the USR in one session, as it normally is provided for people, and they actually had to have it broken down into 4 separate sessions. So there were 4 separate sessions where the soul part retrieval took place a bit at a time. We did all the preliminary work beforehand, but the actual soul retrieval had to take place over these 4 sessions. So I thought that was an interesting difference, and what was so delightful about that particular client is she then went on to persuade every member of her family, sisters, brothers, mother, father, and even grandmother in a different part of the world, again in a different continent, and they all received the USR and all got the great benefit. That was really good. So the reason why it took 4 sessions, as I understand it, is that neither of these people would have been able to handle the entire experience. So although they wanted the work, they needed to have it slowed down to the point that they were able to handle it. And it's always possible that I can do the work in stages. I would say this happens less than 5% of the time, so it's quite rare. It does happen. So the other thing I want to just draw out of this is that after having done all this work on all these members of the family, and even one friend of the family who spent a lot of time in the family home, it then came clear that there was something else to do, and that was working upon the house. So the house had some very malevolent energy which was causing all sorts of symptoms amongst the people that lived there, and having done all the work for them and realising there was something else to do, that I did actually address that piece of work. It's nice to know that it's something that can be done safely and effectively. That particular piece of work was done remotely and it worked fine, and at the end of the process we put a whole load of seals and protections to make sure that the portal, which had been the ingress point for all this, for want of a better word, nastiness, was actually sealed off permanently. That was a good piece of work, felt very satisfying. It's certainly not a one-off, no. It's possible that those that misuse magic can do things to interfere with the way things are supposed to be on this planet. There are portals which have established functions, and that's absolutely fine. There are a couple that actually relate to this country, England, because there are 2 constellations in the sky. One is called Orion and the other is called Draco, and there are gates which take extraterrestrial beings from those 2 constellations in effectively a funnel, another word for vortex, all the way down at these 2 particular points, and those have been established for many, many thousands of years, and they're protected and guarded. It does enable me to bring up another issue, which there are some well-meaning people in the New Age movement who think it would be a good idea to create a portal where there isn't one. And the understanding I have from this is a very dangerous and undesirable thing to do, and it usually upsets Mother Earth when this is done. So in fact other people go around and close them afterwards to therefore minimise the amount of damage that's being done. So my feeling about portals is that there are many of them, they do exist. Some of them are created by people who misuse magic, others are for routine transportation both in and out of our realm by the extraterrestrial beings. And certainly because it's 2012 there are new developments that are happening. There are certain parts of the world which are very, very interesting in terms of this. Peru is a country where there's enormous developments taking place in a good way. In England itself we have Glastonbury, which is the heart centre of the planet's chakra system. We have London, which I've been informed is the Earth Star chakra. I don't fully understand what that's about. And I've also been informed that York, the city of York, is also another portal. So we have 3 significant places in this country. And it gives me an opportunity to speak about something else. Over a year ago I was doing journeying on my own, and I saw myself in a situation, and I could see it was a future scenario was being shown to me. And what I could see is that the forces of darkness, the forces of wanting to interfere with our evolution, whatever words you like to use, were making their last stand. It was their last gasp effort. Now, because we're so late on in 2012, here we are now in November, what I can say, and all I'm saying is I'm just reiterating what many, many other people are saying, which is that the hold that the forces that we're designing to enslave us and keep us repressed, their energy is diminishing and diminishing and depleting by the hour and by the minute. So we're reaching the situation where they have so much less power than they did. However, what I've been shown is there's going to come a an event whereby they will make their last effort to interfere with our evolution, and at that time all light workers will suddenly become aware there's something to do, and they will all be working together, but they will all be in different locations, so it's working independently yet working together at the same time.